All right. Today, I'm very happy to present Dr. Lindsey. Dr. Lindsey is one of our faculty at UNC Charlotte. She has been performing all over the place, and I'll try to do my best to talk a little bit about where she's been performing lately. But she actively performs with the Spatial Forces Duo, a bass clarinet duo she co-founded with Dr. Christy Banks, which she has received critical acclaim for. She also is an orchestral player. She's played and performed with the Lincoln and Omaha Symphonies, the Fairbanks Symphony Orchestra, the Opera of Fairbanks, and then she also currently performs with Nebraska Chamber Orchestra as bass clarinet. Cannot say that word. Clarinetist, and a substitute clarinet with the Charlotte Symphony Orchestra. Let's see. Dr. Lindsey holds a Doctorate of Musical Arts degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder, a Master and a Master's of Music from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We are so happy to have you today, Dr. Lindsey. And one of my main questions and the reason I wanted to invite you today to this meetup was to get a little bit more information about how to prepare for, yes, a career in music, but also the audition process, how to mentally prepare as well as musically prepare. So before we dive into very specific questions, tell us a little bit more about, when you were, beginning your journey. I guess, why did you decide music? How did you get started? And a little bit about some of your performance experiences.
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. Those are great questions, and thank you for such a lovely introduction. Um, I I have always loved music. I was just one of those kids as a one of those people as a kid who just always loved, singing and being around music. And I was introduced to music in the schools primarily uh, introduced to the clarinet in public schools and really took off in just enjoying that process of doing that during the school day and having that be part of my life. I was also really fortunate as a younger child to study piano, and that really helped me a lot with a foundational aspect of understanding music. I'm not a pianist by any means now, but that was a really important part of my education overall. Um, so I think the next question was like a little bit about my beginning and maybe what I'm up to now, some of my performing. It's a strange time. Obviously, it's uh, March now of 2021, and so a lot of my performing experience right now has gone through this flat screen out into the world, and so I've had to rely on some of my experience with technology to kind of to record myself and do some light editing and work with other musicians to get that music out there. So I have a concert coming up with in the community with Arts Plus, which will be a kind of a living room concert, which I'm really excited about. And so that's one unique way that I've been performing during this time of COVID. Um, Prior to that, I've been really fortunate in my world as a university professor to perform chamber music and to play on occasion as substitute with the Charlotte Symphony, as well as with other orchestras that I in regions where I lived. So I lived in Alaska for a little while. I lived in Nebraska for a short time. I played with some regional orchestras also when I lived in Colorado doing my doctorate. So I think that answered your first set of questions, Suzanne.
Yes, no, that's great. And you work a lot with students now who are performers and desiring to be, full-time musicians. What are some of the pieces of advice that you give them as they start preparing themselves as undergraduates to either go on to graduate school or to start performing, right after they finish their undergraduate?
Absolutely. Thank you. What a great question. I am so fortunate to work with many fine students who are really working to kind of hone and perfect their performance skills. So I think there's kind of two really important things when you're trying to get like a promotion and get your music out there to other spaces. Well, maybe more than two. But one thing is just to be able to have, I guess, what they call like an elevator speech, which would be a 10 to 30-second, concise, engaging, like kind of predetermined way of speaking about what you do. One of my friends would just always say, never be afraid to talk about what it is that you do and what you want to be doing when you meet people. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes when I meet new people, maybe I get like a little modest, or I just don't, I'm kind of in the mix of like editing something, or I'm kind of like, oh, is this really what I want it to be? And maybe I don't want to talk about what I'm doing currently. But I have a friend who just says one of the most important things for him is to just make sure when he meets people, especially in the spaces that we do, which might be casual, going to other concerts or seeing other artists, just to be sure that you're talking about what it is you do and what you're passionate about, and maybe like what's coming up. So I think I have personally taken a little break from social media, but I don't think that that's necessarily the best plan if you're in this time where you're wanting to get your music out there, or maybe you have just more of a professional persona that's out on the spaces that y'all inhabit on social media. So I would say also in that space to have a really clear and concise description, and maybe lots of short clips and snapshots of what your music is like and what you are wanting to promote right at the moment. For me, I just have to have a few planned like points of conversation that I want to speak about if I'm talking about that part of my output. I do some music that really intersects with electronic sound beds and kind of classical acoustic instruments, and I think that has kind of an element of crossover, kind of from like a art music to maybe even popular music, at different venues, or kind of like artsy music found maybe in a brewery space. So that sometimes is a little more challenging for me to articulate. So that's something where I have to have kind of a preconceived idea of, okay, here are the 3 points I'm going to make about this specific type of music. And maybe, yeah, and for me, maybe it's like I want to make sure that I say the music that I like is, it kind of crosses boundaries. It's almost like having an electric bass clarinet in your face. Like I want to have maybe some really specific descriptors. But yeah, absolutely. Like, this is who I am. This is the music I do. Here's where you can find me. And I don't know if you all find this, but I think sometimes just by going to other people's shows that like are in line with the music that you want to create, that has a really big impact on maybe you getting asked to perform or open or be featured as like a potpourri. Not potpourri is such a classical music term, I'm sorry. uh, but like featured on like a collage of artists, like maybe it's an open mic sort of setup where people just come up and perform one or two shows. But if you're out there and going to those things where it's a little more open, where you're performing, where you're meeting artists kind of at a similar level that you're at, like maybe a lot of these artists are just getting started or just established, and maybe that's where you're at. I think that's a really important thing to target if you're kind of, when there are more shows again, but when you're kind of approaching those opportunities. So you're speaking to the right people who are kind of like right at your level and are going to be able to get you an opportunity, maybe performing alongside of them. I think that you both have wonderful instructors. And I know in the saxophone realm, there's like, if you're working with um, Dr. Campbell and Dr. Stale, in the percussion world, Mr. Dior is like amazing. So y'all are really lucky to be performing and working alongside with some of our our finest faculty. And I would say two of our faculty members who are just the most connected in their areas in Charlotte and across the state and across the United States. And actually, Mr. Dior was just in Europe about a year ago, a year and a half ago, or something as well. So, really connected folks. And I think from knowing them and working with them, like the number one piece of advice would be like, don't be a jerk. I know it seems like kind of a old-fashioned thing to say, but I think in the classical realm and in maybe in the jazz world or in a more club setting, I think it still goes to show that people want to work with people that they like, and people, even if you don't like have a great affinity and really like someone and are friends with them, they still want to work with somebody who's shows up on time, easy to work with, gets their gear set up appropriately, tears it down, knows what they're doing. Are you all hearing that from your professors? Is that kind of a when you're talking about auditioning and or getting gigs or playing with different ensembles, do you hear those sorts of um, feedback from them?
No, that
Yeah.
was really good, Dr. Lindsey.
Okay.
And I was just curious. I mean, it sounds like Aaron and John have a little bit of an understanding of what it looks like maybe to audition, to prepare for something like that. But just in case, and for my own benefit as well, can you tell us a little bit about your personal audition experience? You know, when you think about different, whether it be a chamber ensemble or more of the symphony, can you tell us a little bit more about what that process is like? And
Absolutely.
I think that's something that I've always found really daunting as a non-professional musician, just to think about that really competitive process.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So in an orchestral setting, um, those are probably the most formal auditions that one is going to embark upon. And usually that will come up in a setting like I had just pulled up um oh like musicalchairs.com or musicalchairs.info. That's where you would find the opportunities to audition, or also if you join actually like the musicians union, then you get a subscription to the magazine where all the orchestral jobs are listed. Or if you're in the region and you know of the orchestra, so you know of the Charlotte Symphony, or you know of the Salisbury Symphony, or you know of the Union County Symphony, if you go to their websites or their social media pages when they have openings, then you can find them there. So that is probably really useful for kind of the regional state orchestra that is kind of the first step in really building your resume and career. So I just from what you were talking about, Suzanne, I wanted to say that, I mean, the first step is like finding where the job is. So you got to kind of find out where the job is. You have to find the orchestral excerpts list for that specific job. And then kind of hopefully building up to that, y'all are working with your private instructors to know kind of the most famous orchestral excerpts that are going to be out there. So Aaron, there's just a few for saxophone. You got to be familiar with those. There's a whole pile for percussion, John, as I'm sure you're well aware of, and for kind of those different areas or realms of percussion, whether it's, you know, the xylophone or glockenspiel or whatnot. So knowing those excerpts, getting those from your teacher, then knowing those pieces of music, like really just like listening to that, looking at the score, that's definitely a process in preparing those auditions. So there's a certain level of kind of a little bit more ease that comes to you when you know you've really listened, you've really, you know, gone through the process of practicing this material in a really, you know, deep dive sort of way. You want to make sure that if you're taking orchestral auditions, you make time to get together with friends and have them sit in the room with you and just play for them so that you can have that experience of playing for other people in the room and maybe instruct them to kind of act like an orchestral committee is going to act. They might stop you in the middle of something and say, thank you, please go on to the next excerpt. They might, they might ask you to do it again. Could you try that again? I'd like to hear it 2 clicks faster, So maybe getting together a little informal panel like that would be really helpful to prepare yourself for just kind of that experience of being in that space. I think people find lots of different routines and different ways of coping with the stress and the excitement and I think there's a lot of feelings around performing. There isn't just nervousness. There's like, wow, I've been working for years on this and I want to do a great job. So I think there's a lot of feelings, and one piece of advice that has been really meaningful for me is to make sure I try to feel all of those feelings and not just focus on the ones that are, really shaking inducing, or like the really nervous ones, like to try to feel that there is excitement and there is pride and there is a history of work and a deep love for this thing that we keep doing, despite the challenges of making beautiful sounds on our instruments and the challenges of um, getting out there and performing well in an audition setting. So I think that kind of gives like a kind of snapshot approach to the idea of the orchestral audition.
Yeah, thank you. That was so helpful.
Okay, great.
And my last question before I open it up to John and Aaron, you mentioned earlier about networking and how important knowing people is in this industry. I guess who are key individuals within like the music space that students need to start thinking about, whether it be the conductor, whether it be more the people on the administration side of things of the organization. But I guess when you think about for yourself networking with different groups, who are those key people that you really want to reach out to make those stronger connections?
Oh, that's a great question. Especially in a smaller or regional orchestra setting. Well, for each of you, number one, and for anybody, is your teacher. Because your teacher is going to get gigs that he or she always cannot always accept. And then they're going to, go through their list of other professionals that they know that may not have had the opportunity, and they might recommend those professionals. And then when the time is right, I know for all the teachers that y'all work with, and for really the teachers at UNC Charlotte on a whole, our next step is going to be like, all right, what student is really ready to take on that professional role? I know this is an opportunity that this student can can perform well on, like literally on their instrument. And so, who can I really trust that has really shown me that they're responsible, that they're, you know, always coming to lessons prepared, coming earlier on time, coming warmed up, all those things that we all talk about all the time. When you show your teacher that consistently, then they know that they can send you out into the world, because you become a representation of them, specifically if they recommend you for a gig, and of course the university as well. But really, when you're looking at recommendations and networking for gigs, and this is sort of in the like classical or specifically trained like jazz idiom, like when you're the first person that you're going to get a recommendation from is probably going to be your teacher. When it comes to maybe again, yeah, and I guess that's what you're asking. So I think number one is your teacher, and number two are other professionals that you know, whether it's, you teach at a, community music school and other professional teacher in that space also plays a lot of gigs, then you'll know that that's a person that you want to be connected with as well, showing them basically those very same sorts of traits so that they might also be able to recommend you. While, uh, recommendations for gigs without auditions, those of course have to pass through the upper and middle management and the director of an orchestra. There is a lot of autonomy and a lot of authority given to the the instrument specialist. So the people that are going to be available to recommend me for other gigs are other clarinetists mostly, or other woodwinds, like, oh, the flute player says, oh, hire Jessica, she's really, she sounds great, she's dependable, she'll definitely be there. I've worked with her on this and this and this, situation. Um so I think your teacher and other specialists in your area are the people that are going to recommend you for those first couple gigs to get your foot in the door.
So I mean, how can Aaron and John be most competitive? I know they're practicing hard. They're auditioning probably. They're coming up with their own music. John's about to come up with an album. I guess there are a lot of people out there trying to do music. So how can they right now be working towards really setting themselves apart to become this specialist, to become someone that someone would want to hire for a gig or an orchestra or a band or something? How can they really just upstage anybody else to be able to get some of those jobs?
That's a tough question because there are so many people out there doing this and wanting to do this, and I think there are so many unique individuals out there really bringing their personal voice, especially when you're creating albums, or um, I think when you get into maybe like a jazz at the Beckler, just to reference your background, Suzanne, or like playing with the Charlotte Symphony, there's a very specific kind of, sometimes it feels a little, but boxed in, but it's a very specific aesthetic that and standard that is desired. Um, and when you're out producing your own music and forming ensembles, I think that's when a lot of creativity really comes into play. And so I think my answer is kind of twofold, kind of in some ways for either of those situations, and in some ways kind of polarized for those two separate situations. And I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but I really think number one is just, you have to be a person that people can depend on if you want to just set yourself up to be um, standing out in the field. Be the communicator. Don't be the harasser, but be good at communicating. Get back to people within 12 or 24 hours. If something comes up and you can't complete a commitment, let them know as soon as possible. Work with them to find a replacement. Um, Make it clear that that was a one-time thing that will never happen again. So just on one hand, and in kind of the classical music world, like, your dependability and the fact that people know they can count on you to do what you say you would do, that's probably some way that you can really, really stand out. For that, I'd say, like, I'm a liar without my calendar. I have to have my calendar if I'm going to accept a gig, if I'm going to reschedule a lesson or schedule a new student. I've got to have that calendar updated, and I've got to have it with me, and I have to, follow that to the T. So that organizational piece is huge. And then I think being devoted to your craft and the creativity that you can find within your craft, your combination of your classical music training or your music school training, and your creativity, your ingenuity, the things that you hear that other people aren't hearing, or that you hear in a different way that you're able to incorporate into your musical output. Um, the things that you're able to improve upon from the music you're hearing around you, that you're, with your own special take on it. I think if you can find an individual who is incredibly creative with high standards, who is also like dependable, showing up on time, what they say is what they do, and what they do is what they say. If you find those two components, that really makes any sort of musician really, really stand out in their field. Um, and that kind of is built upon the fact that, of course, you're you're practicing, you're being thoughtful, you're listening, you're being kind to yourself, you're maybe starting to do some teaching, so you find that process of taking what you've learned and putting it into your own words and giving that gift to other people, but also kind of giving yourself that gift back, where you're able to really um, have your own take on your expertise, and then give that to others. So I think all those things, all the excellent work you're doing now, starting to do some teaching, um, connecting with people um, that are like you in your area of artistry, that are like one level or two levels ahead of you in your area of artistry, getting some students you can bring up to your level of artistry, and doing your best to be an authentic person, staying organized, being honest when you have made an error, and trying to be as upfront with people as possible. I think that's my recommendation. I rambled a lot there, but I hope it made some sense.
No, that's great. I mean, you spoke a lot to the professionalism piece of being a musician, just the excellent communication, the organization of it, which is so, so important. So thank you so much for that.
I think, I mean, just work with your teachers. You both have excellent people that you're working with who can really help guide you, who know you personally, who are really invested in you. So never underestimate that relationship, and go to them with your questions and concerns, and they're going to guide you in the right direction.
Well, thank you so much for doing this session today. It was very helpful. I've already written down several things that I hope to add to our resources. So, John and Aaron, feel free to reach out to Dr. Lindsey if you have follow-up questions. But thank you so much for being here today. I hope you all have a good rest of your week. Enjoy the beautiful sunshine.